Good morning and welcome to Crown of Life. I'm Pastor Dave Young and we are Around the Table with Jesus, a devotional time on Monday mornings. On my right is Pastor Ben.
Good morning. Great to be here with you. Thank you for joining us. And to my left is, we're a little short today because we're practicing our social distancing.
Yes.
And it's nice to be here with Tommy Bahama and enjoying our...
I thought I'd just kind of cheer us all up a little bit. And...
I like the shirt.
Yeah, so
very nice.
So
very
where
bright.
were we at? Where did we leave off?
So we left off last week, if you were joining us, in Mark chapter 6. We covered the first part of the chapter, and we saw Jesus coming into his hometown, kind of being rejected there. And he sends out the 12 disciples, two by two, and then there's this little break in one of his Mark sandwiches. We take a little break from what the disciples are doing, and we go back to talking about John the Baptist and his death. And that's where we left off last week. This week we come into the disciples are now returning and reporting what's been going on.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so we're going to pick it up at verse 30. The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And so he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. "This is a remote place," they said, "and it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat." But he answered, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "That would take 8 months of a man's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?" "How many loaves do you have?" he asked. "Go and see." When they found out, they said, 5, and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to set before the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them all. They all ate and were satisfied. And the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of men who had eaten was 5,000.
Great miracle that we see there. But even before that miracle happens, it's the disciples are coming in to Jesus to talk about what's been going on, and yet he pulls them away just to a quiet place to get some rest. So in the midst of all the ministry and the things that are going on, important for the disciples to have that resting time with Jesus.
Mm-hmm. So, and when the apostles came back, it says they reported all they had done and taught. So I imagine some of those miracles were some of the things that they shared too, some of the miraculous things that they saw.
Mm-hmm.
And this morning I just shared with Pastor Ben that we got an email from one of our members whose relative was in the hospital, and they had pronounced the person dead, but they kept working on this person. And 15 minutes after they had told the wife that the person had died, they brought him back, and he's got no brain problems. He's been healed miraculously.
Yeah.
So those things are happening still.
Praise God for that.
Yeah.
It's a wonderful thing. Yep, we still see those miracles happening today.
And then as we see this miracle unfold, Jesus first kind of puts it to the disciples. You give them something to eat, right?
Right.
Okay? And they, of course, think in terms of limited resources. We've only got 5 loaves and a couple of fish, right?
Yep.
But put that in the hands of our God, and all the provision is taken care of.
He can do all that. There's this banquet here on the hillside, kind of out in the open, and And if we go back to last week, in the first part of the chapter, you see King Herod is having a banquet as well, but it's a whole different situation. There it's in his palace. He invites those who are respectable, who have honor, and yet Jesus has this banquet out in the open and invites everyone. Everyone comes to see it happen. And then Herod is doing this banquet, to improve his status, to make him look good among everyone, and yet Jesus is having this banquet in order to serve everyone and to teach and to bring them the food that they need and what he can do with that. And as Jesus is ready to distribute the loaves and the fish, in verse 41 it says, "Is taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves, gave them to his disciples to set before the people." And you get kind of that image of that Last Supper too, as Jesus is giving thanks for what he has, and he breaks the bread and shares it with them, a similar type of
and in fact,
experience.
Each of the gospel writers records this miracle, and it's after this miracle that Jesus goes into the teaching in the Gospel of John. He goes into the teaching, "I am the bread of life." And so he's really trying to help them to understand that he is what they really need. So
right. And the people, kind of finishing with that in John, it also talks about this is a time when the people are coming to Jesus and want to force him to be king after doing something like this. And so Jesus has to withdraw. You see that the number of men listed there is 5,000, and one of the other Gospels mentions that, that's plus women and children. But even you see this small army amassing of these men, perhaps ready to say, "Hey, Jesus, you're our king, you're our leader, we're your army, let's go and take on the government." All right.
Why don't we continue?
Yeah. We'll pick up at verse 45. "Immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. After leaving them, he went up on a mountainside to pray. When evening came, the boat was in the middle of the lake, and he was alone on land. He saw the disciples straining at the oars because the wind was against them. About the 4th watch of the night, he went out to them, walking on the lake. He was about to pass by them, but when they saw him walking on the lake, they thought he was a ghost. They cried out because they all saw him and were terrified. Immediately he spoke to them and said, 'Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid.' Then he climbed into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves. Their hearts were hardened. When they had crossed over, they landed at Gennesaret and anchored there. As soon as they got out of the boat, people recognized Jesus. They ran throughout that whole region and carried the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. And wherever he went, into the villages, towns, or countryside, they placed the sick in the marketplaces. They begged him to let them touch even the edge of his cloak, and all who touched him were healed." That's where we'll stop.
So we have the miracles of controlling nature, Jesus walking on the water, and then the miracles of healing that Jesus does as well.
Yep. At the beginning of that section, dismissing the people, Jesus again takes some time out to pray on a mountainside. We see in Mark he does that a few different times. It's usually at night. It's away from the disciples, kind of doing it by himself, but it's also at a time of stress too.
Right. He needs to connect with his Father, just like we need to connect with the Lord as well. Yeah. And he just takes the time, makes sure he takes the time to do that. I think that's a big encouragement for us in these days, make sure we are staying close to the Lord, because it's easy to let the fears, if you watch the news for just a few minutes, the fears can pop up really quickly.
Absolutely.
And so you got to stay close to the Lord. And that's what Jesus does by trying to get away. But I thought this was interesting. He goes out in the 4th watch of the night. and he was about to pass by them.
Right.
So, it's like, was Jesus just going to go to the other side and get there ahead of them?
We'll see if you notice me. Yeah.
But they spot him, and of course they think it's a ghost. They're scared as they would. And Jesus speaks these words, which are great words for us again today. Take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid.
Right. It is I. We've been going through the Bible study on Sunday mornings about the I am statements of Jesus. And here, he doesn't say I am, but he says it is I. Right? It's me. So you don't have to be afraid. You can take courage. And the disciples, they didn't understand about the loaves. If Jesus, they're surprised that Jesus can do such a thing here, and yet they just saw him take 5 loaves and 2 fish and multiply it to thousands of people, and yet they still very quickly let fear or just unbelief kind of creep up on them.
Yep.
Yeah.
The doubts pop in. So
that's right. And then the great healing that you talked about, and if they could just even touch the edge of his cloak, and we go back a couple of chapters when the woman who was bleeding for so many years and was able to touch his cloak and found healing. These people too. And the things that I love about Jesus and what he does is that, he doesn't come across anybody that needs healing that he doesn't bring healing to.
I can understand the religious leaders being concerned about the crowds that are gathering for Jesus, because they're losing status in all of this. And Jesus, of course, comes through for people the way that they could never come through for people.
Right.
So,
yeah, they've become obsolete in what they're doing. Yeah.
Well, next time we're going to read a little bit more about clean and unclean things in chapter 7. We thank you for being with us this morning, and we hope you can join us again.